From the creator of The Control Group comes a new scripted podcast, The Seventh Daughter.
Still predicting the future, are you? Then tell me, sister, what's the future hold?
Bloodshed, suffering, death.
The Seventh Daughter. All 10 episodes available now. Listen on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi guys, my name is Sammy J. I've been working as a correspondent and interviewer since I was 13. And now at 17, I am so honored to be the youngest person to have her own podcast on iHeartRadio. It's called Let's Be Real with Sammy J. We'll have in-depth and unfiltered conversations with celebrities, activists, athletes, and influencers. We'll cover topics we're curious about, topics my guests are passionate about, and topics many of us are just too afraid to talk about. I get past the fluff to what's real. We go there, and it's fun, pretty crazy, and very revealing. Listen to Let's Be Real with Sammy J on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to the final episode of Disorganized Crime, Smuggler's Daughter. Thanks for joining us on this long, strange trip into the history of my family, past, and subculture. In the previous episode, my dad confessed a secret to my mom he'd been holding for almost 30 years. In 1992, my senior year of high school, and 4 years after my mom thought Dad had retired from outlaw life, my dad and his New York smuggling partner, Hi-Fi, loaded up a car with a rinky-dink smuggle of 50 pounds of poor-quality pot in the Midwest. Soon after, Hi-Fi was busted, and his freedom ended up costing Hi-Fi 10 years of debt to the Mexican cartel. Dad got out of pot smuggling a free man by the skin of his teeth. Despite his arrest, Hi-Fi, a man of honor, never rolled on my parents. In this episode, my parents speak to Hi-Fi for the first time since 1992. I'm Rainbow Valentine. This is Disorganized Crime, Smuggler's Daughter.
Rolling a doobie, young, free, and groovy, making it up as we roll along. Rolling along, far out country road. Feeling great in the Golden Gate, dodging the law up in New York State. Making it up as we roll along.
A great childhood because I had wonderful, invested, supportive, loving parents, a stable home and family, and the immense privilege of wealth, which provided education, opportunity, and freedom. I was a lucky child because my parents were careful, industrious, and creative, along with their adrenaline-loving risk-taking. Being blissfully unaware my parents were pot smugglers, I never felt burdened the way other children of smugglers privy to their parents' illicit activities may have felt. My big sister Vertica didn't want to speak on tape for fear of hurting our parents' feelings. Because for her, growing up aware our parents were smugglers was difficult. Now, this podcast has prompted most of my childhood friends to reveal they too are smugglers' kids or smuggler adjacent. And one of my oldest, best friends, we'll call Saffron, is a smuggler's daughter who was aware of her mom's unlawful occupation, like my older sister. Last time I was in California, I sat down with Saffron, and although I've known Saffron for 40 years, I'd never heard these stories. Okay, so I want to talk about you growing up with smuggler parents and having the knowledge as a child that your parents were involved in this trade, which was not my experience, but it was the experience of my sister. So I just want to, tell me about that. Tell me about...
So I knew two things. I knew that both of my parents did drugs. because they did them. I mean, like in front of me. So there was nothing hidden in my world at all. Nothing at all. I guess I was aware of the smuggling. I was aware of the smuggling because I remember having kind of an underlying sense of fear all the time. I remember I got a note sent home to my biological father, and it was spelled the wrong way, and the way they spelled it was the name of a federal agency. And so I freaked out because I thought that it was about that agency and that they were after us.
So you thought a federal agency was sending a note home?
Correct. I was like in first grade or something at that point. Yeah. But yeah, so I remember sort of a constant underlying sense of fear or dread or concern, like knowing that something was not right, and knowing that like at a legal level, but then also knowing it at the functionality of my parents' level, like they were inebriated a lot of the time, and so that created challenges. And also knowing it at a very practical level, like when I would bring a friend over, I would have to make them wait at the door so I could run up and put away all the drugs that were upstairs in our house. And I was always afraid that a friend would see the drugs. It was only later that I learned, in fact, it was only really recently that I learned that so many of my friends' parents were doing drugs, and I had no idea.
Yeah, you described to me sitting on bales of pot.
Yeah, when I was really little, like 4 maybe, our house didn't have very much furniture, but there were bales of pot that were like our seats and our table. Yeah, that was, to me, that was normal. Yeah. Like I didn't really have any judgment about the stuff itself, except that I knew societally it was bad. And I knew that I got really annoyed when my parents were stoned, and I would call them stoned old people because they would make me crazy because they were stupid, as I perceived it.
While Saffron and I both come from psychedelic pioneers, a lot of her experiences were shaped, unlike me, by parents with addiction. For many years, her mom was an addict, and her biological father was mentally unstable. And her parents were into cocaine as well as pot. So Saffron's childhood is sprinkled with more danger and risk than mine. Her mom regularly took her to the interior Amazon jungle, where her biological father lived. And being a single parent, her mom would now and again take Saffron to work with her, meaning go do deals. Saffron remembers accompanying her mom to various Marin homes, sitting in a corner and reading books about horses, while her mom and colleagues would conduct business, aka drug deals. How long did your mom smuggle for? How long did you know? Was this your whole childhood?
So I guess, I don't know if this is a specious distinction, but I actually make a distinction between smuggling and dealing.
Yeah, they're totally different. My dad was never a dealer.
Yeah, so my mother was a dealer most of my life. I think she only smuggled for a little while when I was really young and when we were going back and forth from South America.
So Saffron's mom was a dealer, which means she was selling much smaller quantities than my dad, a distributor, who was selling quantities in the thousands of pounds. Saffron's mom was probably working in the 20 pounds to 100 pounds. Saffron's mom also dealt cocaine in addition to pot, whereas my dad only distributed pot, except for that one time in 1972 with a Rose Coke. Saffron and I started talking about money. Because I didn't really put money together with pot as a kid.
Oh.
They were separate things.
No, I knew money was associated with drugs because I remember this one time that my mother had done a particularly large deal, and she was talking to me about what we should do with the money.
Oh my God. How old were you?
I was somewhere between 8 and 12. I always felt like we had enough. It didn't feel like I didn't feel like we were rich. And part of it was also that she was a single mom. Mm-hmm. So there was a bit of struggle in there, but not real struggle. We had a house and all of that.
I asked what happened with her biological father. We hadn't talked about it much growing up.
So what would happen was my biological father, she'd send me down there to live with him, and with a round trip ticket. And then he would...
On the plane by yourself?
Mm-hmm. Have I not shown you those photos? I have amazing photos of me, like, with Shipibo Amazonian spears on the airplane. Yes.
How old were you?
I think in that I was like 6.
Oh my god.
Yeah, but she would send me down. I went down a couple times. I don't remember how many, but I remember at least once, and I think more than that, my father sold the plane ticket, probably for drugs. And
he sold your plane ticket home?
So, yes, so she had to come down and, I mean, essentially he kidnapped me, sort of, depending on how you look at it. And so she would have to come down and get me. So, you know, they were both like super coked up. I remember, I have this very vivid memory of she came down to get me, and we were, I don't remember where we were, but we were in a hotel room, and it was very white, and they got in a fight, and he threw a hairbrush at her, and it hit her nose, and because she was so coked up, the blood just splattered everywhere. That was horrible. That was definitely not a good memory. But anyway, so she would come and take me home, and then we moved from Mill Valley way out to West Marin, and my biological father was arrested for dealing or something in Peru and went to a Peruvian jail when I was 8. Then he and I would write letters to each other then.
How long was he in?
Well, he had such a crazy story. So he went to jail, and then somehow he managed to get married in jail to the woman that he'd been arrested with. And then because of that, they sent him off to live in the middle of the jungle, like weeks from nowhere. So he was out of jail, but he was in the middle of nowhere with this woman. And then on a finca, which means a farm. And then they managed to escape from there somehow, and they got up to Mexico. And then that was when I was 16, and I went down to visit my father, thinking that his wife would be there, and so he would be somewhat sane, but I was very wrong. I got there, and his wife had just left him 2 weeks before, and he was a total lunatic. But he wasn't dealing drugs at that point. But yeah, so that was a very real consequence of the drugs. There were no consequences ever with my mother, because she was never caught.
Today, Saffron has a much better understanding of her mom and a lot of respect for her. She admires her mom's ability to survive as a single mom and eventually get sober. Because ultimately, Saffron understands her mom did the best she could at the moment, and everyone is making it up as they roll along.
In my case, with my mother, I always knew, no matter what, that she loved me. Like, that was never a question for me. But she was crazy. I mean, that's sort of how I saw it, is she was crazy. And as I've gotten older, I've come to see it as she was doing the best she could. She was trying to provide, and she's sort of naturally the opposite of risk-averse, risk-compelled.
Yes, my parents too, adrenaline junkie.
Yeah, so there was something about that she liked, and I also think she liked being a woman in a sort of largely male-dominated world, and it was also a big sort of FU to the societal norms. It was, I'm not, because she had a pretty, not standard, but a pretty impressive academic, pedigree, and she was super smart, and she could have done a lot of things, but she didn't want to do those things. It was part of the, the counterculture.
Saffron recently told me she always envied my family life because it appeared unchaotic compared to hers. Of course, she didn't know my dad was a smuggler like her mom. So to her, my parents appeared to be law-abiding and normal. Saffron points out that I enjoyed the best parts of being a smuggler's daughter, a childhood of great abundance and free of adult worries. Now, like several of my hippie kid friends, Saffron experienced psychedelics in childhood. And while she looks back at those events with some distress, she also believes taking psychedelics in childhood had benefits, revealing to her at an early age the comforting, harmonic unity of humans and nature.
Oh, I think I was talking to my mother about, the first time that I did mushrooms. And she said, well, actually... And I said, yeah. And she said, actually, the first time you did mushrooms, you were